This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning. We also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 17th of March 2021 and I am Miss K.
I'm Tom.
And I am JM. In case you missed the headlines this morning, here they are. In the Daily Nation, Uhuru whips Raila rivals into line. In the Standard, how Raila is lining up his cards. And in the Star, Uhuru Raila men clash over plot to duck referendum. Quite a bit here about Raila Odinga.
Absolutely.
Yesterday,
Yes.
the president called Raila and also some other NASA leaders.
Yes.
And the bearded sisters, we call them.
Yeah.
And told them to just make sure that they field one candidate
Yes.
to get their house in order.
Yes.
And make sure that they get Machakos.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
before we get into that, why don't we talk a little bit about some of these headlines?
Oh, absolutely. Now, the Uhuru Raila Kalonzo Mudavadi coalition is a final blow to Ruto. And herein would want to repeat something we have said many times. Kikuyu's Sugoi chapter, please do not overrate yourselves. It will not really matter in 2022. But before we say why, we want to teach you the law of the critical few over the trivial majority. This law teaches us that political disruptions are not caused by many people. They are caused by a few, a critical few.
Yeah.
Everybody abandoned Trump. Only a critical few who believed in disruption stuck with him. The trivial majority crucified Jesus. But the critical few of 12 disciples changed the world. Lenin in Russia converted 17 disciples who converted 17 million to the communist cause. King Leonidas of Sparta fought over 1 million Persians using only 300 soldiers. What's our point here? We have two. One, William Ruto's presidency will be scuttled by less than 15% of the total Gemma vote. In fact, only 935,000 Kikuyus are needed to make Ruto the first Kalenjin official opposition leader. The Raila Musalia Kalonzo Wetangula coalition has an intact 44% hold of the nation. In fact, Raila since 2007 has maintained a 44% hold of country. The remainder, 6%, is equivalent to 935,000 votes. Are we saying Uhuru Kenyatta can miss to get 935,000 votes? Can't happen, won't happen. Lastly, and second, in every election that the Kikuyu vote has been split, the winner of the election has always been the one with the fewer Kikuyu votes. In 1992, Kikuyus voted for Kenneth Matiba and Mwai Kibaki. Daniel Arap Moi became president. In 2002, Uhuru Kenyatta got over 60% of the Kikuyu vote. Mwai Kibaki became president. The whole country and a bunch of Kikuyus ganged up to vote for Kibaki. This scenario is very likely to repeat itself in 2022. And that's if we have an election. And that's a big if.
I do like that you keep saying we're not going to have an election, and you're very true. If we're going to have an election, then all we need is a bunch of Kikuyus, like a bunch of bananas. That's it.
Absolutely. That's it.
This week, the Supreme Court declined to render an opinion on the legality of VBI. And I'd like to speak a little about our courts as well, but I would like to warn Raila and the president not to trust the lawyers in our courts. Allow me to explain why they should not trust the lawyers in our courts using a story. Some behavioral scientists in the institute conducted a survey. They wanted to experiment on the thinking of different professionals. And so they invited an engineer first into the room. He walked in, sat down, and received his first and only question. What is 2 plus 2?
Right.
And he did not hesitate.
Yes.
He answered, of course, it's 4. The researchers thanked him and sent him away. The second in the experiment was an architect. They posed the same question. What is 2 plus 2? The man paused for a moment and answered, the answer is 4. However, 3 plus 1 is also 4. There are many ways to look at it. They thanked him and dismissed him. Lastly walked in a lawyer. He was asked the same question. And like the composed scientists, this one panicked. He stood up, he went to the door and he shut it. Then he carried his chair close to where the researchers were sitting. Leaning towards them, he told them, you see, 2 plus 2 can become anything. What do you want it to be? Now, for lawyers, there is no such thing as absolute truth. Truth is relative. It can be anything you want it to be. So the lawyers in our courts cannot be trusted to take BBI and leave it as it is. As Samuel Clemens, everyone here knows him as Mark Twain, once said, interpreters of law can always be depended upon to take a reasonably good law and interpret the common sense all out of it. They can be depended upon every time to defeat a good law and make it inoperative. And you can trust me on this. I am a lawyer.
It's a great submission.
I love it.
I had to say it.
Now, in this standard, they've told us about how Raila is lining up his cards. And this paper is equating Raila Odinga to a duck, which remains calm on the surface, but is paddling like hell underneath. He is currently busy at work crafting a winning political alliance for the 2022 election. And by the way, Raila Odinga will be the candidate to beat in 2022. He's only 6 or so percent away from 50% plus one.
Absolutely.
And this is a lesson for restless Ruto. Raila, in March of 2018, realized that if you want to catch something, you first have to let it go. If you want the presidency, behave like you do not want it, like you're not interested in it at all. So after swearing himself in March, Raila was surrounded and under pressure from all sides. The diplomatic community here, Kenyans, his own supporters, the international community, his wife, his children, you name it. And they all threatened to use their reserves of strength and sanctions to punish him. But when he was given a way out by Uhuru, he let go of his claim that he had won the 2017 election, and he traded it in for proximity and favor from the incumbent, knowing that this would enable him get closer to achieving his goal of becoming president. Letting his claim to the throne go was not an end in itself, but a means to a greater end, getting what he wants. You see, you have to give something up in order to pocket it. But this is a strategy which requires far-sightedness, something that restless Ruto appears to have been lacking a lot of lately. Meanwhile, while we are on restless Ruto, in dealing with him, Uhuru is using the Chinese principle, which says that to burst a balloon, you must first inflate it as far as it will go. So he is his very own undoing.
I do like that. And I think that's the principle that all women use. If you want a man to marry you, pretend that you don't like him.
So, lady and gent, I think we award the winning headline to the Standard, to the Daily Nation.
I agree with
Uhuru
you.
whips Raila, rivals into line.
I agree.
Wonderful. So on to the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. We have a 3-part criteria that we use to assess them. Are they humorous or dry, satirical or pessimistic, and effective or just plain lazy? In the interest of time, I will just get us to describe our winning cartoon.
Winning cartoon is a sad one. It's a caricature of a just departed Robin Jogu, who was the head of radio at Citizen Radio. He died of COVID, I think days after his mother had died. And I think we at the 5th Estate, the Fort Hall School of Government, would like to send his family our condolences.
And now, on to our final thought. But before we get there, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that like button.
Yes. Now, our final thought, it is inspired by a book entitled Austerity, When It Works and It Doesn't, by Alberto Alsina, Carlo Favero, and Francesco Giavazzi. I'm Italian these days.
Apparently you are. The three authors of the book have been working on the topic of austerity individually and as a group for over 30 years. And the book seeks to give a broad perspective of the topic, austerity, that none of their papers could have given on their own. They define austerity as a policy of sizable reduction of government deficits and stabilization of government debt achieved by means of spending cuts or tax increases or both.
Yes.
And the book examines the cost of austerity in terms of lost output. It also seeks to determine what types of austerity policies can achieve the stated goals at the lowest cost and the electoral effects for governments implementing these policies. According to the authors, if governments followed adequate fiscal policies most of the time, we would almost never need austerity.
Yeah.
Economic theory and good practice suggests that a government should run deficits during recessions, when tax revenues are low and government spending is high as a result of the working of fiscal stabilizers such as unemployment subsidies, and also during periods of high spending needs, say because of a natural calamity or a war. These deficits should be balanced by the surpluses during booms and when spending needs are low. In addition, a good forward-looking government, like any forward-looking family, would want to accumulate funds for a rainy day to be used when spending needs are temporarily or exceptionally high. And if governments followed these prescriptions, austerity would never be needed. Instead, periods of austerity are relatively common for two reasons. The first is that most governments do not follow the prescriptions I just mentioned, and deficits often accumulate even when the economy is growing, and the deficits produced during recessions are not compensated for during surpluses in booms. As a result, many countries have accumulated large public debt even in perfectly normal times. The second reason why austerity may be needed is that sometimes exceptionally large amounts of government spending, for example, because of a war or a major disaster, perhaps even larger than anticipated, create so much debt that it cannot be simply reduced with economic growth. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts on austerity?
No, I love this, and before I even say what I need to say, this book must be read against an article by Jean Ventura on why the country that borrowed the most advanced the most. All right, I don't think there's any right way to do that. Right, number one. But second, I'd like to dedicate this book to the voodoo economist called David Day, the toxic pessimist who's always attacking government. Sometimes I get the feel that he's an accountant masquerading as an economist. Anyway, I won't spend too much time on him. My takeaway from this is that in times of economic recession, as a government, you do not have to impose austerity measures. Confidence is everything. All right? Now, he says this: confidence and uncertainty are related. If consumers and firms do not know whether and when a fiscal stabilization, like institution of the stimulus package, will take place, but they're aware that it is unavoidable, then this will increase the uncertainty, possibly reducing consumption and investment. Now, in a period of runaway debt, economic actors know that something sooner or later needs to happen. They may wait until the uncertainty is resolved before spending. Bottom line, investor confidence is killed. Let's ground this locally. If Uhuru Kenyatta did not inject a stimulus package into the economy, we would be in the red. And here's why. In the second and third quarters last year, Kenya's economy contracted by an average of about 3.3%. Then President Kenyatta announced a 52 billion shillings stimulus package, tax cuts, interest rate cuts, cutting of mobile money fees, increase of transaction limits. The result was phenomenal. In a single quarter, the economy recovered by 3.6%. The idea here was to encourage spending and not stifle it. We did not do austerity, and this is what created confidence. And guess what? Kenya was one of the few countries globally that did not go into recession. South Africa, Nigeria, the UK, the US, Japan and all other first world countries have gone into recession. We did not. We did not do austerity, and we have survived.
Let me talk about the politics of austerity. Now, it's complex, but it's not necessarily a political kiss of death. That is what the authors tell us. So if you're a presidential candidate looking to get into office, raising taxes, that is tax-based austerity, or expenditure-based austerity, which is where you cut public spending, probably is not the way to go.
Yes.
And the authors say this is because voters like low taxes and they also like well-funded services.
Yes.
So they want a huge welfare system
Right.
so that they pay very little, but they also want a low tax regime, which often means that they reward short-term policies without considering the long-term implications. And that is what conventional wisdom tells us.
Yeah.
But the authors suggest that governments can still do well at the polls even after imposing austerity policies.
Yes.
And they have some examples here. In 1997, Canada re-elected its pro-austerity government, as did Sweden in 1998, Finland in 1999, and even Kenya.
Oh, absolutely.
Under Moi in 1992 and 1997.
Yes.
We rolled back the frontiers of the state, as Professor Mutahi Ngunyi says. And even when the government did that, they still found themselves in by hook or crook.
Absolutely.
So the UK's Conservative Party increased its share of the vote after 5 years of austerity measures in the year 2015. That's a more recent example. And so what they're saying here, it's clear that not every austerity program has to lead in has to result in a change of government.
Yes.
But then they also say that even more complex than winning an election is running a country.
Yes.
And that is one reason why governments will always prefer to implement tax-based austerity measures rather than expenditure-based austerity measures.
I like that.
So they would rather impose taxes on the population than try and cut back on public spending.
Absolutely.
Because cutting back on public spending is very complicated, has some unintended results. You weaken the state and all of that. But getting taxpayers to pay more, fairly simple to implement and fairly predictable in terms of results.
Oh, yes.
And they also say, in addition, expenditure-based austerity measures require a lot of political maneuvering.
Absolutely.
So that's the nature of austerity, and that's a long and short of it. So if you're a presidential candidate in 2022. Don't fear too much. Having to impose some austerity measures.
You know what, GM, and here's the thing: President Uhuru Kenyatta comes into power 2013. Immediately, there is something we call the VAT law. So products that were non-vatable then became vatable. 16% applied across the board, right? So fuel, goods that were not vatable. Now, what happened was such outcry there, but that bill was from even during Kibaki's time. But how did anybody expect Uhuru Kenyatta to finance a budget that had devolution in it, and he still wanted to build infrastructure? You absolutely had to tax the hell out of Kenyans, right? True. And there is and just like any other country, the painful reality is building a country is like making sausages. The making of sausages is such a disgusting process. You don't want to see it. And it's a painful process. And that's the same as adding taxes. Even if your fuel has been taxed, remember, country is being made. Once you finish building country, and then all the infrastructure is built, you are not going to blame government for taxing you.
Absolutely.
I have two comments to give on your submissions, both of you. The first one is for you too. Yesterday's book, I think, would benefit. You would benefit from looking at yesterday's book on narrative economics. You mentioned investor confidence.
Yes.
And one of the recurring narratives that we tell ourselves, and economics is based on stories, is that of confidence.
Yes.
It's a myth.
Yes.
It's a recurring narrative,
Yes.
but it works.
It works.
It works,
It
and
works
we
like a
do
charm.
get a boom at the time when we require it, which is what we got in Kenya.
Yes.
And to you, Jonathan, I do have this to say. Tax-based austerity measures have always been used even in the past. Whenever you think about any great republic, when it was being built, they would go and tax, kings would tax the complete hell out of their citizens to be able to achieve the goals that they needed to do. The Romans came hard on their citizens to do the highways that they did.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think this will continue into the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, it must. Today we had a winning headline from the Daily Nation and a winning cartoon from the Star. And today I would also like to, as we close, throw shade to economists. A chemist, a physicist, and an economist were passengers on a flight that crashed in the middle of the ocean. Swimming to a tiny island, they discovered water but no food. So they were overjoyed when a crate of canned food washed up on the beach. The chemist lost no time in getting to work on a chemical formula that would dissolve the lids of the cans. The physicist picked up a boulder and set to work calculating the angle and velocity of the blow which would pierce the cans. Observing their frantic efforts, the economist simply picked up a can, scratched his chin and said, "Let's assume we have a can opener." Economists, full of assumptions, as Story Mingi. Have a good night.
Absolutely. God bless.